Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. Sunday now, the 10th day of September. Peak of the hurricane season, I guess climatologically speaking, around this day each year. And this peak season, we have a lot going on out there. The big headline, of course, is Hurricane Lee. It looks like it's going under a strengthening phase again, and it's probably going to get very strong again. And this week ahead is going to be very big for how Lee interacts with a lot of different complicated features in the atmosphere over the western Atlantic and North America, and it's going to be really interesting. We're going to have impacts. We are already seeing them in the form of swells and rough seas in certain locations around the Atlantic Basin. When you get a big, intense hurricane like this far west in the Atlantic Basin, now basically approaching the southwest Atlantic, you're not going to get away with no impacts. And that's what we really need to focus on. What will Lee do? What are the impacts going to be? And certainly we need to know where we think it's going to go, because the closer it gets to us, yes, the bigger those impacts will be, the more they will be felt. All right, so let's break it down and see what we've got as we start things off on this Sunday. Good to have you with me. I appreciate you tuning in. All right, first of all, National Hurricane Center homepage. That's pretty busy for September the 10th. Despite the El Nino, things are very busy. We have Lee out here on its way to becoming a major hurricane again, and it could get very strong once again because the atmosphere is going to get more favorable with those very warm water temperatures for this to develop further and regain a lot of that strength. We have Margot out here, which is also going to intensify, I do believe, and then a couple of other systems to watch. And for those of you that peek under the covers, so to speak, and behind the curtains and all that stuff, you know, looking at the long range, right? You've seen what the potential could be down the road, way out beyond the long range forecast in the time period of the fogginess of chaos. Yes, it's going to be a busy time ahead. All right, satellite animation courtesy of our friends over here at TropicalTidbits.com shows a strengthening Lee, and boy, you can really tell. Look at that outflow getting much better established also on the southwest side. The banding features are very prominent, developing a more rounded CDO, central dense overcast. That's what that is, with an eye trying to develop in there. Again, the eye will warm and it dries, and the intensity really starts to ramp up when you see that starting to happen. You also see that Margot over here becoming much better organized as well. And look at that really interesting feature coming off of Africa, coming out to the northwest there. That is pretty neat. I don't know exactly what you call it. A wind surge of some kind. That's pretty cool to see. The satellite technology we have these days is remarkable. And then all kinds of disturbed weather sitting out here. We're going to have to watch this. I think something does try to get going somewhere out in the Atlantic here in the coming days as we watch Lee and Margot and how they interact with each other. A lot of interest, of course, in the eastern part of North America up here, including Atlantic Canada and Bermuda. So yeah, a busy week ahead for sure. But on this Sunday, I guess today's the start of the NFL season, right? So a lot of people are watching football. So hopefully you're tuning into this video later, because look at that. There's an eye trying to pop out there. The upward motion, you can really see it there. The air getting thrust out into the atmosphere. We call that convection. And it's getting a more rounded appearance, getting better organized, and this will again be well on its way to becoming a very strong hurricane again. Luckily, only some very low clouds streaking through parts of the Caribbean, well away from any particular, areas of more concentrated banding. In other words, we're not going to have to worry about it down here. We were concerned about that a few days ago, if Lee was going to track closer, but it's not. So there won't be any direct impacts, and the influence, though, is really interesting. I mean, look how far down into the Caribbean it's pulling in air and moisture, just a huge area of low pressure here. And then the low pressure is getting lower. It is deepening as we speak, and Recon will be in there off and on, measuring and checking things out, and we get those amazing shots from, I think it's Fly Anonymous or whatever it is, that Twitter handle. And you saw that lightning the other day from the nighttime. That was amazing. So yes, the Air Force reserves and NOAA doing their research missions. We're going to really be keeping a close watch on Lee. It won't be able to do anything without us noticing it first. But for you guys down in the islands there, except for the swells coming in, no major impacts for you. Of course, you probably already knew that. So we've got to start thinking about what might happen for our friends in Bermuda. And then eventually, the southeast coast of the United States in terms of big swells coming in. And then maybe, we're not sure 100% yet, maybe the northeast United States, New England, possible that there could be direct impacts. And that is an absolute true statement. These forecast errors in just a normal 5-day forecast are already large enough. Then you talk about day 6 and 7. Those don't exist operationally. I think the National Hurricane Center runs internal 7-day forecasts. It wouldn't surprise me. And they certainly talk to the Navy because they have to have time to move ships and stuff, right? But when you're looking at something that is 6 or 7 days away, a week out, so much can change. And I'm going to show you a thread over on Twitter, and I'm eventually going to quit saying this, but it'll always be Twitter to me. So that's what I'm going to call it. That is really fascinating, this thread I'm going to show you. But when you look at this, the mechanics of what we're looking at, Lee is on its way, and it's going to be very, very strong again in the coming hours and days ahead. And that's going to generate a lot more of these big swells coming out. All right? All right. So I've never met Yakov in person, but we have corresponded over Twitter many times over the years, and I really like the straightforward nature, using graphics and animations and whatnot to back up what he is saying. And this is a very interesting thread. So I'm going to drop out with my picture because we want to focus on this, and I'm going to read it and then try to explain what he is talking about here. I think this is very interesting, helping to explain some of what we have been seeing in the modeling. You remember yesterday the Euro brought the whole Northeast there into look out. It was just one run. And today the GFS closer to the Northeast, New England. And so what does this all mean? Why is this happening? Well, let's take a look at this thread here from our good friend Yakov, all right? I say good friend. I know him, like I said, through Twitter. Maybe one day I'll get to meet him in person. All right, so he says, and we got to start at the top here. Top of the thread, Mark. To forecast tracks of large, relatively intense hurricanes, especially ones that are heading into the mid-latitudes and beginning the process of extratropical transition like Lee is expected to do, I'm putting a couple words in there, by late this week, one needs to look just as much at the jet stream level, 250 millibars up, as the mid-levels of the atmosphere, 500 millibars up. There has been a notable trend, we're going to use yellow here like we'd be highlighting stuff. There has been a notable trend in the GEFS, that's the Ensemble Forecast System, toward a better defined, more negative tilt trough late this week from the eastern Great Lakes to North Carolina. That is important because it helps to bend the track back if you just look at it very, very simply. All right, we continue. Note how the flow ahead of the trough from along and just off the mid-Atlantic coast to southeast New England backs from southwest to south-southwest in previous runs to southerly to south-southeast in the last few runs. And you can see that in this GIF animation that he's made, all right? Also, the jet streaks near, what is he saying here? Maine and New Brunswick, right up here, is stronger, 110 versus 80 knots in more recent runs. So this jet streak up here getting stronger. All right, so you got New Brunswick right here. You have Maine over here. All these meteorological factors helping to try to figure out what Lee is going to do. Then we go down to the mid-levels. At the 500 millibar level, important trends are evident. Notice how the trough that moved through the Great Lakes midweek lifts out more quickly with higher heights. That's very important. That's that air building back up north and northeast of Lee versus what the GFS showed a day or two ago. So the trough lifts out, your heights build back over the Atlantic ahead of Lee, and that air just gets thicker, and really it's like a pile of air, and Lee can't go through it. This leads to a scenario where Lee and the eastern U.S. trough it is embedded in becomes more separated from the jet stream, which is now displaced well north over southern Canada. In that case, it is more likely that Lee's possible escape north-northeast towards Atlantic Canada is blocked. And a north to north-northwest track towards Long Island or eastern New England becomes more of a risk. As shown by, and this is really important, the 12ZGEFS. I'm going to bring myself back on. Yesterday, people like me posted one snapshot of the European ensemble, right? The operational. It was one model run snapshot of the operational. I was just basically saying we could have a problem, just getting people to be aware. A couple people like to pile on and say it was fear-mongering and scare tactics and it's just one run. And in some instances, they are right. It is just one run. But we at HurricaneTrack, myself being the face of it, not in the business of fear-mongering, we're trying to inform people and just make sure they're aware. You know, we got a lot going on in the world. You know, we're not scaring people and sounding alarms and red lights flashing everywhere. But Yakov here brings up a very important point. And the people yesterday that were correctly calling out some of the people, myself included, making note that it was just a snapshot, and I actually showed it when it was still well offshore, to my credit, that you need to be aware of it. It was just the operational. And the EPS, the Ensemble Prediction System of the Euro, was way east, way enough, right? So when we see the GAEFS, in other words, the ensembles, all the models, it's like talking to the conductor versus the rest of the orchestra about how good everything is or whatever. You understand? It's like a consensus or whatever analogy you want to throw at it. The ensembles really help to show the way. And you have just one outlier, you can't latch everything on that. And that's not what I was doing. And some of the other people that posted those runs, that's not what they were doing either. Some people just get upset and I think they're just looking for a reason. I don't care. We're trying to inform people. So this is important. All right, so let's keep on looking at it. As shown by the 12ZGEFS, we also need to consider the possibility that Lee's interaction with a strong jet streak to its north helps it to maintain strength instead of weakening over cooler waters. That interaction, it's very true. Sandy did that. This is a different type of setup, but that does happen. We call that baroclinic processes. All right, there's more to it than just latent heat and convective processes. You have baroclinic influences, so it could stay pretty strong. We need to remember that. All right. Now, I am, of course, aware that the EPS, there you go, I love the fairness here, and that's the Ensemble Prediction System, as well as some operational models have a stronger Northeast U.S., Eastern Canada trough than the GEFS and a weaker Northwest Atlantic ridge mid to late week. Nonetheless, it's interesting than the Canadian ensemble shows similar trends. So it's mixed still. It's complicated, like my title was yesterday. Of course, that had more to do with Margot, and Margot does still play a role. Yakov goes on to say, and at 500 millibars. So he's talking about this jet streak at 250 and 500 millibars. New sentence similar to the GEFS. The GEPS, that's the Canadian version, lifts the Northeast U.S. Eastern Canada trough out more quickly than prior runs and allows more ridging. That's so important to return north and northeast of Lee by Friday, reducing the chance that the trough can pick up the hurricane. And the more ridging you've got up here out in front of it, the more it gets blocked and it takes a more south to north track closer to places that we hold near and dear to our hearts, right? Land. And increasing the risk that Lee will be far enough south by Friday, Saturday to be captured, or at least accelerated northward by the next trough digging into the Great Lakes. The GEPS and the GEFS are both trending towards a sharper western U.S. ridge. You see that right here. And towards a sharper western, a deeper downstream trough over the Great Lakes. That helps to capture it and bring it more to the north overall instead of northeast. So again, this is still 6 to 7 days away. We don't know for sure. All these different pieces, stuff can change. And we just need only look at the 5-day error cone, right? That cone of uncertainty, and then the average errors. I don't know what they were. They change every year. But, you know, at 5 days, it's not like the average error is 25 miles. That would be wonderful. But it's not. I believe it's still over 200 miles. That's a long way. And we're talking now, the difference in 200 miles At 5 days is the difference between Cape Cod and Boston getting hurricane conditions, Maine, right, and southwest Nova Scotia, versus more Halifax and out towards Cape Breton. Okay? That's 5 days. 6 and 7 days, which don't exist yet operationally, the margin of error could be 300 to 400 miles. It's a lot. So there's a lot happening here still. Everything's changing along, and we go about our busy lives, watching Sunday football, Saturday football, college yesterday, right? The work week starting tomorrow. Everybody's busy. And all of this is still evolving, all right? And the social media stuff moves very, very fast. So we're just trying to keep you up to date with what's happening here. We got good people like Yakov watching it along with me. And there's others out there too. You know that. So let me just show you. This is kind of the stuff I look at. These are your height anomalies at 500 millibars. These are your departures from normal. Here's the current setup. You see what happens with Lee. This is on the GFS from today. We scooch this out into time. Hey, come on, fiber, let's go faster. We shouldn't see blank frames. We scooch this along. You see those blues in there? That's your lower, your negative anomalies. But it's just enough. There's just enough up here, this reddish color in here, that gets Lee blocked from just curving gently out and away on this particular run of the one model here, the GFS. It does make landfall in this model in southwest Nova Scotia exactly a week out. A week! Are you really going to take that bet that the range, who knows what it could be, something like that? I'm just guessing. This is no way anywhere close to being settled. And, we all hope that it'll thread the needle between Hatteras and Bermuda and do something like this and then maybe pinwheel up or whatever they do, right? But hope is not a good planning tool. You can't hope these things away. It doesn't work that way. You might think it does, but it doesn't. You have to have action, and that's all we're wanting you to do, is just consider, what will I do if this comes up much closer and crosses eastern Massachusetts and goes into the Gulf of Maine? If I'm up in New England, I'm asking myself, if that happens, what am I going to do? And if that is fearful, I am sorry. I don't know what else to tell you. I think somebody, you'd rather know than not. Now, the European at the same part of the atmosphere is obviously a little different, and it's a little bit more east with Lee, but not by much. I mean, look at that. It landfalls basically right over Halifax in a little bit longer time period, a day and a half longer or something like that, right? So, this is still so far out in time. We've got to see what Margot does, because the more distance there is, if Margot is more over here, you get some more ridging. I mean, you can just, like chess, there's so many moves and counter moves and so forth. By the way, I'm going to put a link to this thread right here in today's update for you in the description, so you can read this for yourselves that Yakov had put out there. Now, one thing, impacts. Check out this wave guidance from the GFS. These are significant wave heights over the next several days. This should get your attention. Look at that, man. Even the greens are 7 feet. And then the yellows and oranges and reds, holy mackerel, we're talking 13, 15, 17 feet. And then anywhere near the center there, I mean, and quite far away, 20 feet plus. That's a 2-story house. And you look at Bermuda, look at that. Man, oh man, 20-something foot waves headed toward Bermuda. That's going to be a problem. These big waves are going to emanate across the Atlantic. Oh, wow, this is really going to be something. And we're going to have to watch that very closely, because that will have impacts. Beach erosion. I think we're coming up on a new moon. Things have been kind of crazy in my life the last couple of weeks, as you are probably aware. So I've lost my moon phases. I think you know what? Let's do it live. Hey Siri, when is the next new moon? I mean, honestly, it can't just answer it. It shows me all these results. I don't have time for that. I tried. New moon's coming up, regardless. It couldn't just give me a straight answer. Maybe I should try Chat GPT, right? But a new moon is coming up. We got to look at that, because then it adds a little bit extra to the high tides when they happen. And the low tides are a little bit lower, so it goes both ways. So, anyway, we got a lot to watch. It's going to be an interesting week ahead. I will be on top of it, of course. I just want to make sure you're staying in touch with what's happening in the world of the tropics, lee, and everything else potentially. All right? Have yourselves a great rest of your Sunday. As always, thanks for tuning in. From all of us at Hurricane Track, I am Mark Sudduth. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.